Okay, so Yule has a question for us. How do you feel when you try to explain your work to non-physics friends, sometimes even non-mathy friends? So I guess if you're fine with that,
Yeah,
I'll go
go.
first. So um, for me, sometimes this can be very difficult, and it's really like a process. Every single time, one thing about me is that I don't necessarily expect people to be interested per se in my research. So I'm always sort of taken off guard when people ask me for more details than sort of like the basic spiel I give people is that I work on like material science essentially, and then usually
Yeah.
they leave it at that. And then as soon as they sort of probe past that, sometimes it's been sort of like a process of learning, how do you explain eigenstate thermalization to people? So I try to. Originally, I would go into like, what is an eigenstate? What is an eigenvector of a matrix? What is a matrix? And so sooner or later, you sort of dig yourself a hole and no one knows what's going on. And people just nod along, of course, and let you say your spiel. So then I try to focus on the thing that I find that's successful now that I've learned more and more is that you sort of ask them like interesting questions about like or you say something like I'm really interested in why temperature tells you so much about our everyday life and why sort of like these physics equations that people have like quantum mechanics and all the goofiness you get in quantum mechanics, and you can tell them about like Stern-Gerlach experiment, double slit experiment, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, and things like that. And sort of like, I have all this goofiness going on, and then once you get up in the morning, for some reason you're checking the TV and you're looking at like what's the temperature today, and somehow that one singular number tells you so much. And that usually becomes an interesting thing to tell them. Another thing to tell them is like, I have all these colleagues who are working on these really cool things like superconductors or, describing insulators. And, the condensed matter community has been so successful inventing different type of like, perhaps this is, like a lot of the technology that you see has first passed through the condensed matter community because like materials need to be like classified and understood first. So like, we're sort of the stepping stone, and then, then you pass it along, and people find that very interesting as well. And Yule says, because when you get deep into foundational physics, things get impossible to explain. I guess the moral of the story is I used to try to understand, try to explain those things, but now I sort of avoid them and try to motivate interesting questions that would be fun to solve and fun to understand. What do you think, Wyatt?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and it's something I ask other people all the time because I'm like, how do you like? Some people, so some people for sure have it easier than others, and I think you probably have a very difficult one because this, I can show pretty pictures with mine. Like basically, my go-to is I literally grab a coffee cup and I'm like, look at this thing, and then I'm like, this occurs because light's focusing, but it's focusing imperfectly. And then you can talk about, okay, well, light isn't just, ray trajectories, it's actually waves. And guess what else is a wave? Particles, but they also have trajectories. And then, you can talk about that. It takes a long time to like get good at that. And
it does, yeah.
Every time you try, it's different. And then you're like, I messed this up. So, but there's benefits to, like, for me, I think there's benefits in that I can sometimes use props and like getting good at just like drawing things on a piece of paper. Like, just like, look at this, like this can, and it's like, even now I find like describing my research more difficult without just doing it by like telling you and telling the audience rather than being like having a whiteboard behind me, which would have been maybe smarter. But yeah, it's tough, and I can't imagine what it is for you because like eigenstate thermalization hypothesis, like, oh yeah, like what does that mean?
Yeah, like what are the moving parts in that? Like why do we even why do we even care, right?
You ever heard of an out of time order correlator?
Yeah, they're on the Reddit thread today, or I guess yesterday, someone asked, like, can you explain scrambling in more layman's terms? And I wrote something down that was like, you're sort of like hiding information non-locally and things sort of get spread out so much. Conservation of information is easy because it's just sort of like I can retrace my steps or I can say what's going to happen in the future. But scrambling is like when I wrote that answer, I was like, you know what? I wouldn't, like, if I was this person, I wouldn't accept this answer because like what is information then? Like why is it being hidden? Like where is it? What is it? It's not a very satisfactory. I actually don't have a good explanation for what scrambling is, as you can probably see by the video, in terms of something that's not mathematical. I really think of that phenomena mathematically. The nice thing about eigenstate thermalization is that it took me like a year to get to the point where I was actually explaining it by not actually addressing what ETH was.
Right.
But it's just sort of like, you find the wonder in the fact that our macroscopic universe is so trivial. So I just sort of like, I guess I zoom out and say, why does StatMech and thermal work? And I don't even say what StatMech and thermal are. I'm just like temperature, pressure, volume, macroscopic things.
Yeah.